friends, welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. Thank you for joining me for day 3 of our read along together of A Room with a View by Ian Forster. Let's see, today we're going to start with a lovely tea. There's a bit of stress in the air, so I thought I would have some lovely, lovely herbal chamomile tea. This one I made it from the dried chamomile blossoms that I'd picked up a while ago. And it's just such a gorgeous, bright, sunny color. And it tastes delicious, and I always enjoy it. So, nice chamomile tea. Smells so good. Really good. Okay, so I hope you're also enjoying something wonderful today. If you don't have anything wonderful to drink or to nibble on, let's at least have some good food for thought. Let's talk a bit about what happened in yesterday's chapter of A Room with a View. So, Room with a View, let's see. We're only 2 chapters in. Lucy Honeychurch is in Italy exploring Florence, and in chapter 2, her cousin Charlotte is not ready to leave the pension, the place where they're staying, and so they agree that rather than Lucy staying home with Charlotte or daring to go out all alone to Italy, which would be scandalous and dangerous as a single young woman alone traversing an unknown country, it's decided that she will go with Miss Lavish, who is another guest at the Pension Bertolini, and Miss Lavish is intent on going to the church at Santa Croce, and so as long as she's going there, she's willing to take Lucy with her. However, she is very insistent that Lucy should not bring her Baedeker, her guidebook, and instead they will go exploring, they'll have an adventure, they'll smell the smells of the city, they will talk to the common man, they will explore and just have a wonderful time. Interestingly enough, they find out that they do know they know some common areas, and they're like, do you know this person and that person? So they end up talking about Italy or about their homes in England on the way over. But on their way to to Santa Croce, to the cathedral, they realize that they have wandered off and gotten lost. And so it takes a while for them to finally find their appropriate place. And once they get there, Miss Lavish says that she needs to go speak to somebody. She sees somebody that she has to talk to very quickly. And so she leaves Lucy on her own there. And so Lucy goes from feeling like, she's hesitant about this adventure, right? She's a bit more conventional. She's a sheltered young woman, let's say. And so this idea of having an adventure, in a way, it's sort of like the door is starting to open just a little bit. But then as she's left on the steps of Santa Croce all alone with Miss Lavish talking to somebody else and leaving her feeling abandoned and forgotten, those doors start to close up again as she starts getting afraid of this big wide world around her. However, then she notices that there are some people she recognizes, and she had at first been a little scornful of them when she'd first seen them, the Emersons, father and son, when they had gone under the church, and she had in fact laughed at them a little bit with Miss Lavish. But when she realizes that she's alone there, and there is a little boy who needs help, she runs to help the little boy, and so does Mr. Emerson. Again, they're both kind people. And so she ends up talking a bit with Mr. Emerson. And let's see. She speaks with Mr. Emerson, and it's kind of interesting too, because she's saying how she doesn't have her Baedeker. Without her Baedeker, without her guidebook to tell her what is beautiful, how will she know what are the things that she should enjoy at that church? And so she's saying, like, I want to see the artwork, but I want to see the one that was admired by Mr. Ruskin, and I want to see the one that was this, and I want to see the one that was that, instead of allowing her own eyes to appreciate and find what she thinks is beautiful. And so again, it's an interesting little bit there. And Mr. Emerson basically says, I'll show you around. But in the course of showing her around, he overhears a gentleman, a British clergyman, who's later revealed to be Mr. Eager, who I guess is also staying at the Pension Bertolini with them. And Mr. Eager is saying some things with which Mr. Emerson does not agree. And of course, he can't just let it go. He's like, what? How would you say that? It's like, and so he butts in, and he unintentionally offends Mr. Eager, And some of the other people who are in the group listening to Mr. Eager are Miss Teresa and Miss Catherine Allen, the two little old ladies from the Pension Bertolini, whom we had the other night just, had made that comment to her about Mr. Emerson might be a bit uncouth and a bit rough, but he is, he's genuine and beautiful in that way. And so Mr. Emerson is just feels a little guilty that he said some things that were perhaps not, not intended to be rude. And so he runs off to go apologize. His son says it's not going to help. He's going to try to be kind, but he's going to offend them again. And people are offended or frightened by him. And Lucy and the son have a short conversation together. And after the son walks off, the father comes back and he mentions how his son George is sad. His son George is melancholy and that he is, He says, "Don't be stupid over this. I don't require you to fall in love with my boy, but I do think you might try and understand him. You're nearer his age, and if you let yourself go, I am sure you are sensible." And he also says to Lucy, "You are inclined to get muddled, if I may judge from last night. But let yourself go. Pull out from the depths those thoughts that you do not understand and spread them out in the sunlight and know the meaning of them. And by understanding George, you may learn to understand yourself, and it will be good for both of you." So the father, I kind of love Mr. Emerson. The father is telling her to just be open to the possibilities of things and just to be kind and to allow herself to be herself instead of just to feel bound by the rules that are again around her. But Lucy is afraid of it. I mean, she is at this point unable to fathom that there's a different way of thinking about things. And I love this line too. Mr. Emerson says that, he says that George is unhappy because when he sees that there is an everlasting why, he wants him to also realize that there is a yes. Even if it's a transitory yes, there is a yes there. You don't always have to question that there can be joy, there can be happiness. That there doesn't only have to be sorrow when you question things. And Lucy, at the same time that she sort of hears him, she can't quite understand him. And she says, maybe he just needs a hobby. For me, I like to play the piano. My brother likes to collect stamps. Perhaps he just needs a hobby. And Mr. Emerson realizes when she says this that she is not able at this point in her life to be able to help George find the possibility of what can be. And so because her worldview isn't big enough at this point. It's a very sweet and a little bit of a sad scene because Lucy thinks that, they say to her, because her cousin Charlotte approaches, that poor girl, and she, even though she feels it for a bit for herself, that she is unhappy about Charlotte approaching or having to leave Mr. Emerson and having to go back to what, who they all want her to be. But she won't admit it even to herself. And she says, "Poor girl, I fail to understand the point of that remark. I think myself a very fortunate girl, I assure you." And so she tries her best to convince herself that she is happy and content and that this is exactly what she wants. And she goes back to meet up with her cousin. So that's where we left off in chapter 2. Today we are going to read 2 chapters because the second is rather short. And so we're going to read chapters 3 and 4 today. Chapter 3 is entitled Music, Violets, and the Letter S. It so happened that Lucy, who found daily life rather chaotic, entered a more solid world when she opened the piano. She was then no longer either deferential or patronizing, no longer either a rebel or a slave. The kingdom of music is not the kingdom of this world. It will accept those whom breeding and intellect and culture have alike rejected. The commonplace person begins to play and shoots into the empyrean without effort, whilst we look up, marveling how he has escaped us, and thinking how we could worship him and love him would he but translate his visions into human words and his experiences into human actions. Perhaps he cannot. Certainly he does not, or does so very seldom. Lucy has done so never. She was no dazzling executante. Her runs were not at all like strings of pearls, and she struck no more right notes than was suitable for one of her age and situation. Nor was she the passionate young lady who performed so tragically on a summer's evening with the window open. Passion was there, but it could not be easily labeled. It slipped between love and hatred and jealousy and all the furniture of the pictorial style. And she was tragical only in the sense that she was great, for she loved to play on the side of victory. Victory of what and over what? That is more than the words of daily life can tell us. But that some sonatas of Beethoven are written tragic, no one can gainsay. Yet they can triumph or despair as the player decides, and Lucy had decided that they should triumph. A very wet afternoon at the Bertolini permitted her to do the things she really liked, and after lunch she opened the little draped piano. A few people lingered round and praised her playing, but finding that she made no reply, dispersed to their rooms to write up their diaries or to sleep. She took no notice of Mr. Emerson looking for his son, nor of Miss Bartlett looking for Miss Lavish, nor of Miss Lavish looking for her cigarette case. Like every true performer, she was intoxicated by the mere feel of the notes. They were fingers caressing her own, and by touch, not by sound alone, did she come to her desire. Mr. Beebe, sitting unnoticed in the window, pondered over this illogical element in Miss Honeychurch, and recalled the occasion at Tunbridge Wells when he had discovered it. It was at one of those entertainments where the upper classes entertain the lower. The seats were filled with a respectful audience, and the ladies and gentlemen of the parish, under the auspices of their vicar, sang or recited or imitated the drawing of a champagne cork. Among the promised items was Miss Honeychurch, piano, Beethoven. And Mr. Beebe was wondering whether it would be Adelaida or the march of The Ruins of Athens, when his composure was disturbed by the opening bars of Opus 3. He was in suspense all through the introduction, for not until the pace quickens does one know what the performer intends. With the roar of the opening theme, he knew that things were going extraordinarily. In the chords that herald the conclusion, he heard the hammer strokes of victory. He was glad that she only played the first movement, for he could have paid no attention to the winding intricacies of the measures of 9/16. The audience clapped, no less respectful. It was Mr. Beebe who started the stamping. It was all that one could do. "Who is she?" he asked the vicar afterwards. "Cousin of one of my parishioners. I do not consider her choice of a piece happy. Beethoven is so usually simple and direct in his appeal that it is sheer perversity to choose a thing like that, which, if anything, disturbs." "Introduce me." "She will be delighted. She and Miss Bartlett are full of the praises of your sermon." "My sermon!" cried Mr. Beebe. "Why ever did she listen to it?" When he was introduced, he understood why. For Miss Honeychurch, disjoined from her music stool, was only a young lady with a quantity of dark hair and a very pretty, pale, undeveloped face. She loved going to concerts. She loved stopping with her cousin. She loved iced coffee and meringues. He did not doubt that she loved his sermon also. But before he left Tunbridge Wells, he made a remark to the vicar, which he now made to Lucy herself when she closed the little piano and moved dreamily towards him. "If Miss Honeychurch ever takes to live as she plays, it will be very exciting, both for us and for her." Lucy at once re-entered daily life. "Oh, what a funny thing! Someone said just the same to mother, and she said she trusted I should never live a duet." "Doesn't Mrs. Honeychurch like music?" She doesn't mind it, but she doesn't like one to get excited over anything. She thinks I am silly about it. She thinks I can't make out. Once, you know, I said that I liked my own playing better than anyone's. She has never got over it. Of course, I didn't mean that I played well. I only meant—" "Of course," said he, wondering why she bothered to explain. "Music," said Lucy, as if attempting some generality. She could not complete it, and looked out absently upon Italy in the wet. The whole life of the South was disorganized, and the most graceful nation in Europe had turned into formless lumps of clothes. The street and the river were dirty yellow, the bridge was dirty gray, and the hills were dirty purple. Somewhere in their folds were concealed Miss Lavish and Miss Bartlett, who had chosen this afternoon to visit the Torre del Gallo. "What about music?" said Mr. Beebe. "Oh, poor Charlotte will be sopped," was Lucy's reply. The expedition was typical of Miss Bartlett, who would return cold, tired, hungry, and angelic, with a ruined skirt, a pulpy Baedeker, and a tickling cough in her throat. On another day, when the whole world was singing and the air ran into the mouth like wine, she would refuse to stir from the drawing-room, saying that she was an old thing and no fit companion for a hardy girl. "Miss Lavish has led your cousin astray. She hopes to find the true Italy in the wet, I believe." "Miss Lavish is so original," murmured Lucy. This was a stock remark, the supreme achievement of the Pension Bertolini in the way of definition. Miss Lavish was so original. Mr. Beebe had his doubts, but they would have been put down to clerical narrowness. For that, and for other reasons, he held his peace. "Is it true," continued Lucy in awestruck tones, "that Miss Lavish is writing a book?" "They do say so." "What is it about?" "It will be a novel," replied Mr. Beebe, "dealing with modern Italy. Let me refer you for an account to Miss Catherine Allen, who uses words herself more admirably than anyone I know." "I wish Miss Lavish would tell me herself. We started such friends. But I don't think she ought to have run away with Baedeker that morning in Santa Croce. Charlotte was most annoyed at finding me practically alone, and so I couldn't help being a little annoyed with Miss Lavish." "The two ladies, at all events, have made it up." He was interested in the sudden friendship between women so apparently dissimilar as Miss Bartlett and Miss Lavish. They were always in each other's company, with Lucy a slighted third. Miss Lavish he believed he understood, but Miss Bartlett might reveal unknown depths of strangeness, though not perhaps of meaning. Was Italy deflecting her from the path of prim chaperone, which he had assigned to her at Tunbridge Wells? All his life he had loved to study maiden ladies. They were his specialty, and his profession had provided him with ample opportunities for the work. Girls like Lucy were charming to look at, but Mr. Beebe was, from rather profound reasons, somewhat chilly in his attitude towards the other sex, and preferred to be interested rather than enthralled. Lucy, for the third time, said that poor Charlotte would be sopped. The Arno was rising in flood, washing away the traces of the little carts upon the foreshore. But in the southwest there had appeared a dull haze of yellow, which might mean better weather if it did not mean worse. She opened the window to inspect, and a cold blast entered the room, drawing a plaintive cry from Miss Catherine Allen, who entered at the same moment by the door. "Oh, dear Miss Honeychurch, you will catch a chill, and Mr. Beebe here besides. Who would suppose this is Italy? There is my sister actually nursing the hot water can. No comforts or proper provisions." She sidled towards them and sat down, self-conscious as she always was on entering a room which contained one man, or a man and one woman. "I could hear your beautiful playing, Miss Honeychurch, though I was in my room with the door shut." Doors shut. Indeed, most necessary. No one has the least idea of privacy in this country, and one person catches it from another. Lucy answered suitably. Mr. Beebe was not able to tell the ladies of his adventure at Modena, where the chambermaid burst in upon him in his bath, Mr. Beebe was not able to tell the ladies of his adventure at Modena, where the chambermaid burst in upon him in the bath, exclaiming cheerfully, "Fa niente, sono vecchia." He contented himself with saying, "I quite agree with you, Miss Allen. The Italians are a most unpleasant people. They pry everywhere, they see everything, and they know what we want before we know it ourselves. We are at their mercy. They read our thoughts, they foretell our desires. From the cab driver down to Giotto, they turn us inside out, and I resent it. Yet in their hearts of hearts they are, how superficial. They have no conception of the intellectual life. How right is Signora Bertolini, who exclaimed to me the other day, "Oh, Mr. Beebe, if you know what I suffer over the children's education. I won't have my little Victorier taught by an ignorant Italian what can't explain no think." Miss Allen did not follow, but gathered that she was being mocked in an agreeable way. Her sister was a little disappointed in Mr. Beebe, having expected better things from a clergyman whose head was bald and who wore a pair of russet whiskers. Indeed, who would have supposed that tolerance, sympathy, and a sense of humor would inhabit that militant form? In the midst of her satisfaction she continued to sidle, and at last the cause was disclosed. From the chair beneath her she extracted a gun-metal cigarette-case, on which were powdered in turquoise the initials E.L. That belongs to Lavish," said the clergyman. "A good fellow, Lavish, but I wish she'd start a pipe." "Oh, Mr. Beebe," said Miss Allen, divided between awe and mirth. "Indeed, though it is dreadful for her to smoke, it is not quite as dreadful as you suppose. She took to it, practically in despair, after her life's work was carried away in a landslip. Surely that makes it more excusable." "What was that?" asked Lucy. Mr. Beebe sat back complacently, and Miss Allen began as follows. "It was a novel, and I am afraid from what I can gather, not a very nice novel. It is so sad when people who have abilities misuse them, and I must say they nearly always do. Anyhow, she left it almost finished in the grotto of the Calvary at the Cappuccini Hotel at Amalfi while she went for a little ink. She said, 'Can I have a little ink, please?' But you know what Italians are, and meanwhile the grotto fell roaring on to the beach, and the saddest thing of all is that she cannot remember what she has written. The poor thing was very ill after it, and so got tempted into cigarettes. It is a great secret, but I am glad to say that she is writing another novel. She told Teresa and Miss Pole the other day that she had got up all the local color. This novel is to be about modern Italy, the other was historical, but that she could not start till she had an idea. First she tried Perugia for an inspiration, then she came here. This must on no account get round. And so cheerful through it all. I cannot help thinking that there is something to admire in everyone, even if you do not approve of them." Miss Allen was always thus being charitable against her better judgment. A delicate pathos perfumed her disconnected remarks, giving them unexpected beauty, just as in the decaying autumn woods there sometimes rise odors reminiscent of spring. She felt she had made almost too many allowances, and apologized hurriedly for her toleration. All the same, she's a little too, I hardly like to say unwomanly, but she behaved most strangely when the Emersons arrived." Mr. Beebe smiled as Miss Allen plunged into an anecdote which he knew she would be unable to finish in the presence of a gentleman. "I don't know, oh, excuse me. I don't know, Miss Honeychurch, if you have noticed that Miss Pole, the lady who has so much yellow hair, takes lemonade. That old Mr. Emerson, who puts things very strangely—" Her jaw dropped. She was silent. Mr. Beebe, whose social resources were endless, went out to order some tea, and she continued to Lucy in a hasty whisper. "Stomach! He warned Miss Pole of her stomach. Acidity, he called it, and he may have meant to be kind. I must say I forgot myself and laughed. It was so sudden. As Teresa truly said, it was no laughing matter. But the point is that Miss Lavish was positively attracted by his mentioning S. And she said she liked plain speaking and meeting different grades of thought. She thought they were commercial travelers. Drummers was the word she used, and all through dinner she tried to prove that England, our great and beloved country, rests on nothing but commerce. Teresa was very much annoyed, and left the table before the cheese, saying as she did so, "There, Miss Lavish, is one who can confute you better than I," and pointed to that beautiful picture of Lord Tennyson. Then Miss Lavish said, "Tut, the early Victorians." Just imagine, "Tut, the early Victorians." My sister had gone, and I felt bound to speak. I said, "Miss Lavish, I am an early Victorian. At least that is to say, I will hear no breath of censure against our dead queen." It was horrible speaking. I reminded her how the Queen had been to Ireland when she did not want to go, and I must say she was dumbfounded and made no reply. But unluckily, Mr. Emerson overheard this part and called in his deep voice, "Quite so, quite so. I honor the woman for her Irish visit." The woman! I tell things so badly, but you see what a tangle we were in by this time, all on account of S having been mentioned in the first place. But that was not all. After dinner, Miss Lavish actually came up and said, "Miss Allen, I am going into the smoking room to talk to those two nice men. Come too." Needless to say, I refused such an unsuitable invitation, and she had the impertinence to tell me that it would broaden my ideas, and said that she had 4 brothers, all university men, except one who was in the army, who always made a point of talking to commercial travelers. "Let me finish the story," said Mr. Beebe, who had returned. "Miss Lavish tried Miss Pole, myself, everyone, and finally said, 'I shall go alone.' She went. At the end of 5 minutes she returned unobtrusively with a green baize board, and began playing Patience." "Whatever happened?" cried Lucy. "No one knows. No one will ever know. Miss Lavish will never dare to tell, and Mr. Emerson does not think it worth telling." "Mr. Beebe, old Mr. Emerson, is he nice or not nice? I do so want to know." Mr. Beebe laughed and suggested that she should settle the question for herself. "No, but it is so difficult. Sometimes he is so silly, and then I do not mind him. Miss Allen, what do you think? Is he nice?" The little old lady shook her head and sighed disapprovingly. Mr. Beebe, whom the conversation amused, stirred her up by saying, "I consider that you are bound to class him as nice, Miss Allen, after that business of the violets." "Violets! Oh dear! Who told you about the violets? How do things get round? A pension is a sad place for gossips. No, I cannot forget how they behaved at Mr. Eager's lecture at Santa Croce. Oh, poor Miss Honeychurch, it really was too bad. No, I have quite changed. I do not like the Emersons. They are not nice." Mr. Beebe smiled nonchalantly. He had made a gentle effort to introduce the Emersons into Bertolini society, and the effort had failed. He was almost the only person who remained friendly to them. Miss Lavish, who represented intellect, was avowedly hostile, and now the Miss Allens, who stood for good breeding, were following her. Miss Bartlett, smarting under an obligation, would scarcely be civil. The case of Lucy was different. She had given him a hazy account of her adventures in Santa Croce, and he gathered that the 2 men had made a curious and possibly concerted effort to annex her, to show her the world from their own strange standpoint, to interest her in their private sorrows and joys. This was impertinent. He did not wish their cause to be championed by a young girl. He would rather it should fail. After all, he knew nothing about them, and pension joys, pension sorrows are flimsy things, whereas Lucy would be his parishioner. Lucy, with one eye upon the weather, finally said that she thought the Emersons were nice. Not that she saw anything of them now. Even their seats at dinner had been moved. "But aren't they always waylaying you to go out with them, dear?" said the little old lady inquisitively. "Only once. Charlotte didn't like it and said something. Quite politely, of course." Most right of her. They don't understand our ways. They must find their level. Mr. Beebe rather felt that they had gone under. They had given up their attempt, if it was one, to conquer society, and now the father was almost as silent as the son. He wondered whether he would not plan a pleasant day for these folk before they left, some expedition perhaps, with Lucy well chaperoned, to be nice to them. It was one of Mr. Beebe's chief pleasures to provide people with happy memories. Evening approached while they chatted. The air became brighter, the colors on the trees and hills were purified, and the Arno lost its muddy solidity and began to twinkle. There were a few streaks of bluish-green among the clouds, a few patches of watery light upon the earth, and then the dripping facade of San Miniato shone brilliantly in the declining sun. "Too late to go out," said Miss Allen in a voice of relief. "All the galleries are shut." "I think I shall go out," said Lucy. "I want to go round the town in the circular tram, on the platform by the driver." Her two companions looked grave. Mr. Beebe, who felt responsible for her in the absence of Miss Bartlett, ventured to say, "I wish we could. Unluckily, I have letters. If you do want to go out alone, won't you be better on your feet?" "Italians, dear, you know," said Miss Allen. "Perhaps I shall meet someone who reads me through and through." But they still looked disapproval, and she so far conceded to Mr. Beebe as to say that she would only go for a little walk and keep to the street frequented by tourists. "She oughtn't really to go at all," said Mr. Beebe as they watched her from the window, "and she knows it. I put it down to too much Beethoven." And now chapter 4, which is rather appropriately just entitled Fourth Chapter. Mr. Beebe was right. Lucy never knew her desires so clearly as after music. She had not really appreciated the clergyman's wit, nor the suggestive twitterings of Miss Allen. Conversation was tedious. She wanted something big, and she believed that it would have come to her on the wind-swept platform of an electric tram. This she might not attempt. It was unladylike. Why? Why were most big things unladylike? Charlotte had once explained to her why. It was not that ladies were inferior to men, it was that they were different. Their mission was to inspire others to achievement rather than to achieve themselves. Indirectly, by means of tact and a spotless name, a lady could accomplish much, but if she rushed into the fray herself, she might be first censured, then despised, and finally ignored. Poems had been written to illustrate this point. There is much that is immortal in this medieval lady. The dragons have gone, and so have the knights, but still she lingers in our midst. She reigned in many an early Victorian castle, and was queen of much early Victorian song. It is sweet to protect her in the intervals of business, sweet to pay her honor when she has cooked our dinner well. But alas, the creature grows degenerate. In her heart also there are springing up strange desires. She too is enamored of heavy winds, and vast panoramas, and green expanses of the sea. She has marked the kingdom of this world, how full it is of wealth and beauty and war, a radiant crust built around the central fires, spinning towards the receding heavens. Men, declaring that she inspires them to it, move joyfully over the surface, having the most delightful meetings with other men, happy, not because they are masculine, but because they are alive. Before the show breaks up, she would like to drop the august title of the eternal woman and go there as her transitory self. Lucy does not stand for the medieval lady, who is rather an Angelico's coronation, Giotto's Ascension of St. John, serious. Nor has she any system of revolt. Here and there a restriction annoyed her particularly, and she would transgress it, and perhaps be sorry that she had done so. This afternoon she was particularly restive. She would really like to do something of which her well-wishers disapproved. As she might not go on the electric tram, she went to Alinari's shop. There she bought a photograph of Botticelli's Birth of Venus. Venus, being a pity, spoilt the picture, otherwise so charming, and Miss Bartlett had persuaded her to do without it. A pity in art, of course, signified the nude. Thank you, I didn't know either. A pity in art, of course, signified the nude. Giorgione's Tempesta, the Italino, some of the Sistine frescoes, and the Epoxiomenos were added to it. She felt a little calmer then, and bought Fra Angelico's Coronation, Giotto's Ascension of St. John, some Della Robbia babies, and some Guido Reni Madonnas. For her taste was Catholic, and she extended uncritical approval to every well-known name. But though she spent nearly 7 lire, the gates of liberty seemed still unopened. She was conscious of her discontent. It was new to her to be conscious of it. The world, she thought, is certainly full of beautiful things. If only I could come across them. It was not surprising that Mrs. Honeychurch disapproved of music, declaring that it always left her daughter peevish unpractical, and touchy. Nothing ever happens to me, she reflected as she entered the Piazza Signoria, and looked nonchalantly at its marvels, now fairly familiar to her. The great square was in shadow, the sunshine had come too late to strike it. Neptune was already unsubstantial in the twilight, half god, half ghost, and his fountain plashed dreamily to the men and satyrs who idled together on its marge. The loggia showed as the triple entrance of a cave, wherein dwelt many a deity, shadowy but immortal, looking forth upon the arrivals and departures of mankind. It was the hour of unreality, the hour, that is, when unfamiliar things are real. An older person at such an hour and in such a place might think that sufficient was happening to him and rest content. Lucy desired more. She fixed her eyes wistfully on the tower of the palace, which rose out of the lower darkness like a pillar of roughened gold. It seemed no longer a tower, no longer supported by earth, but some unattainable treasure throbbing in the tranquil sky. Its brightness mesmerized her, still dancing before her eyes when she bent them to the ground and started towards home. Then something did happen. Two Italians by the loggia had been bickering about a debt. Cinque lire, they had cried. Cinque lire. They sparred at each other, and one of them was hit lightly upon the chest. He frowned. He bent towards Lucy with a look of interest as if he had an important message for her. He opened his lips to deliver it, and a stream of red came out between them and trickled down his unshaven chin. That was all. A crowd rose out of the dusk. It hid this extraordinary man from her and bore him away to the fountain. Mr. George Emerson happened to be a few paces away, looking at her across the spot where the man had been. How very odd. Across something. Even as she caught sight of him, he grew dim. The palace itself grew dim, swayed above her, fell onto her softly, slowly, noiselessly, and the sky fell with it. She thought, "Oh, what have I done? Oh, what have I done?" she murmured and opened her eyes. George Emerson still looked at her, but not across anything. She had complained of dullness, and lo, one man was stabbed and another held her in his arms. They were sitting on some steps in the Uffizi arcade. He must have carried her. He rose when she spoke and began to dust his knees. She repeated, "Oh, what have I done?" "You fainted." I am very sorry." "How are you now?" "Perfectly well. Absolutely well." And she began to nod and smile. "Then let us come home. There's no point in our stopping." He held out his hand to pull her up. She pretended not to see it. The cries from the fountain, they had never ceased, rang emptily. The whole world seemed pale and void of its original meaning. "How very kind you have been. I might have hurt myself falling, but now I am well. I can go alone? Thank you." His hand was still extended. "Oh, my photographs!" she exclaimed suddenly. "What photographs?" "I bought some photographs at Alinari's. I must have dropped them out in the square." She looked at him cautiously. "Would you add to your kindness by fetching them?" He added to his kindness. As soon as he had turned his back, Lucy arose with the cunning of a maniac and stole down the arcade towards the Arno. "Miss Honeychurch!" She stopped with her hand on her heart. "You sit still. You aren't fit to go home alone." "Yes, I am. Thank you so very much." "No, you aren't. You'd go openly if you were." "But I had rather—" "Then I won't fetch your photographs." "I had rather be alone." He said imperiously, "The man is dead. The man is probably dead. Sit down till you are rested." She was bewildered and obeyed him. "And don't move till I come back." In the distance she saw creatures with black hoods, such as appear in dreams. The palace tower had lost the reflection of the declining day and joined itself to earth. How should she talk to Mr. Emerson when he returned from the shadowy square? Again the thought occurred to her, Oh, what have I done? The thought that she, as well as the dying man, had crossed some spiritual boundary. He returned and she talked of the murder. Oddly enough, it was an easy topic. She spoke of the Italian character. She became almost garrulous over the incident that had made her faint 5 minutes before. Being strong physically, she soon overcame the horror of blood. She rose without his assistance, and though wings seemed to flutter inside her, she walked firmly enough towards the Arno. There a cabman signaled to them. They refused him. And the murderer tried to kiss him, you say? How very odd Italians are, and gave himself up to the police. Mr. Beebe was saying that Italians know everything, but I think they are rather childish. When my cousin and I were at the Pitti yesterday, what was that? He had thrown something into the stream. What did you throw in? Things I didn't want, he said crossly. Mr. Emerson! Well, where are the photographs? He was silent. I believe it was my photographs that you threw away. I didn't know what to do with them, he cried, and his voice was that of an anxious boy. Her heart warmed towards him for the first time. They were covered with blood. There. I'm glad I've told you, and all the time we were making conversation I was wondering what to do with them. He pointed downstream. They've gone. The river swirled under the bridge. I did mind them so, and one is so foolish it seemed better that they should go out to the sea. I don't know. I may just mean that they frightened me. Then the boy verged into a man. For something tremendous has happened. I must face it without getting muddled. It isn't exactly that a man has died. Something warned Lucy that she must stop him. It has happened, he repeated, and I mean to find out what it is. Mr. Emerson. He turned towards her, frowning as if she had disturbed him in some abstract quest. I want to ask you something before we go in. They were close to their pension. She stopped and leant her elbows against the parapet of the embankment. He did likewise. There is at times a magic in identity of position. It is one of the things that have suggested to us eternal comradeship. She moved her elbows before saying, I have behaved ridiculously. He was following his own thoughts. I was never so much ashamed of myself in my life. I cannot think what came over me. I nearly fainted myself, he said, but she felt that her attitude repelled him. Well, I owe you 1,000 apologies. No, all right. And that is the real point. You know how silly people are gossiping, ladies especially, I am afraid. You understand what I mean? I'm afraid I don't. I mean, would you not mention it to anyone, my foolish behavior? Your behavior? Oh, yes, all right, all right. Thank you so much. And would you... She could not carry her request any further. The river was rushing below them, almost black in the advancing night. He had thrown her photographs into it, and then he had told her the reason. It struck her that it was hopeless to look for chivalry in such a man. He would do her no harm by idle gossip. He was trustworthy, intelligent, and even kind. He might even have a high opinion of her. But he lacked chivalry. His thoughts, like his behavior, would not be modified by awe. It was useless to say to him, and would you, and hope that he would complete the sentence for himself, averting his eyes from her nakedness like the knight in that beautiful picture. She had been in his arms, and he remembered it, just as he remembered the blood on the photographs that she had bought in Alinari's shop. It was not exactly that a man had died. Something had happened to the living. They had come to a situation where character tells, and where childhood enters upon the branching paths of youth. Well, thank you so much, she repeated. How quickly these accidents do happen, and then one returns to the old life. I don't. Anxiety moved her to question him. His answer was puzzling. I shall probably want to live. But why, Mr. Emerson? What do you mean? I shall want to live, I say. Leaning her elbows on the parapet, she contemplated the River Arno, whose roar was suggesting some unexpected melody to her ears. And that concludes chapters 3 and 4 of A Room with a View. So things are happening apace. Let's see what happens in tomorrow's reading. Tomorrow we're just going to read one chapter, and I look forward to sharing it with you guys. Thank you very much for reading along with me today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon and evening, and I will see you again tomorrow. Bye, friends.